Welkom almal, welkom as jy op die stream saam kyk. Ek wil vra, wil julle nie staan nie en dan aanbid ons bietjie die Here saam? Ja, jy gaan opstaan, dankie dan. Dit is so lekker om julle hier te hê. Ons sien vrek baie uit vir vanaand, so my gebed is net dat die Here jou bless. Kom ons bid gou. Vader, ek dank U, Here, dat U koning is. U is die lam. U is die leeu, en Here, dankie Here, dat ons U kan aanbid vir wie U is, Here, en dat ons U kan ontdek in die wêreld, en U kan ontdek, Here, in die woord. Dankie, Here. Amen. Clouds, kings and kingdoms will bow down, and every chain will break, broken hearts declare your praise. But who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before. For the King of Kings, the God who comes to save is there to set the captives free. So who can stop the Lord Almighty? My God, our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb, and every knee will bow before. Who can stop? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who? And who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, Mag julle kan sit vir die Here 'n lekker hande klap gee. Come on. Amen.
Julle? Hoe gaan het met julle allemaal? Gaan het goed? Lekker, julle is so welkom. Is hier enigiemand vanaand vir die heel eerste keer hier? Enige nuwe mense? Jy moet jou hand opsteek. Onthou, daar's agtereen. Ons wil graag vir jou 'n beker gee en vir jou sê baie welkom. Dankie dat jy hier is. Binne in die beker sal jy sien, daar so is 'n papiertjie en 'n potlood. Jy moet ten minste vir ons invul. En dan gaan ons om na die tyd die papiertjie by jou kry as jy met vir ons kan bring. Maar julle is almal so welkom. Enige nuwe ander mense nie, jy sal 'n meubelstuk. Hy waai net vir my. Hy steek nie sy hand op nie. Hy sal lankal hier. Julle baie welkom. Dis lekker vir ons om julle hier te hê. Ek wil julle asseblief herinner dat as jy ergens nog nie dien of deel is van 'n span nie, onthou daar's offergawe spanne wat moet help. Daar's rooibeker spanne, daar's koffiespanne wat so klein bietjie vroeër kom om die ins aan te sit en die koppies reg te pak. Asseblief as jy nog nie 'n naam opgegee het nie, bring hom na die tyd vir my. Want ek wil graag jou indeel en dan kan jy ons sommer op die WhatsApp groep wees en dan gaan ons sommer, jy doen dit nie elke week nie, so jy commit jouself nie so hard nie, maar jy help ons uit wanneer jy kan. Okay. En dan die laaste ding wat julle moet onthou, of die tweede laaste ding, as jy ook nog nie in 'n klein groep ingeskakel is nie, wil ons jou asseblief motiveer om in 'n klein groep te wees, want ons hele DNA van ons gemeente is gebou op klein groepe, en daarom wil ons jou vra, sluit aan, kom gee jou naam op na die tyd, en ons gaan jou indeel in 'n klein groep, by watter profiel jy ook al wil pas. En dan stranddiens aansoeke, julle, stranddiens is Desember weer aan, woep, woep, can I get a woep, woep, okay, so stranddiens is aan, en as jy op stranddiens wil gaan, dis van 11 tot 23 Desember, amazing uitreik, 'n klomp van die dae doen jy 3 verskillende uitreike op 'n dag, wat regtig jou lewe gaan verander, en jy reik uit na mense, van die rykstes tot die armstes, en ons verkondig die evangelie oral waar ons kom, en is by Haraldsbaai gaan ons bly, en ons bedien by Haraldsbaai, ons bedien in Reebok, en ons bedien in Klein en Grootbrak, so julle is so welkom om saam te kom. Dit gaan so R4.500 per persoon kos, wat alles vir jou insluit, maar as ons jou kan help, dan help ons jou met borge. So ons gee vir jou 'n borgvorm, en ons help jou om borge te soek, so asseblief, moenie laat dit jou keer. Okay, en dan kan ons die Here loof met ons offergawes, so ek wil vra dat julle eers gou vinnig sit, en die sakkies van daai kant kry, en dit deurstuur. En soos die sakkies deurgaan, kom ons bid, kom ons sê vir die Here dankie. Here, ons wil U loof en eer met ook ons offer wat ons kan gee. Ons wil vir U dankie sê dat U ons bless met geld ook, sodat ons vir U kan teruggee daardeur, soos met ons tyd, soos met ons energie, soos met ons harte, Here, wil ons alles vir U gee. En as ons nou gaan worship, Here, is dit ook 'n offer wat ons vir U wil bring. Ons wil vir U dankie sê dat ons kan sing en U naam kan verheerlik. Here, neem ook nou hierdie offer as goed en aanneemlik. Neem hierdie offer aan, Here, want ons wil vir U dankie sê vir alles wat U vir ons doen en gee. Daarom gee ons met 'n hart van dankbaarheid, Here, en ons leef 'n lewe van dankbaarheid, omdat U alreeds die totale prys betaal het. Ons loof en ons prys U vir wie U is. Amen.
Kom maar staan, alsjeblieft. Sing a new song to him who sits on heaven's mercy seat. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, so holy, holy is he. We'll sing a new song to him who sits on heaven's mercies. Let's sing holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. All creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Clothed in rainbows, clothed in rainbows of living color, flashes of lightning, bolts of thunder. Blessing, blessing and honor, strength and glory and power be to you, the only wise King. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Filled with wonder, awestruck wonder at the mention of your name. Filled with wonder, awestruck wonder at the mention of your name. Filled with wonder, awestruck wonder at the mention of your name. Jesus, your name is power, breath and the living water, such a marvelous mystery. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Yeah, all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. We're creation suddenly articulate with 1,000 tongues to lift one cry. Then from north we'd hear Christ be magnified. Were the whole earth echoing his eminence, his name would burst from sea and sky, from rivers to the mountaintops, we'd hear Christ be magnified. Singing, oh, Christ be magnified, let his praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. Oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. Where every creature, when every creature finds its inmost melody, his name in heart, its native cry. Then in one enraptured hymn of praise, we'd sing, Christ be magnified, be magnified. And oh, Christ be magnified, let his praise arise. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. Oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. Hierdie bridge is dit so awesome. Ek wil half challenge, vat hierdie woorde en maak dit jou eie. Let's declare together. And I won't bow to idols, I'll stand strong and worship you. And if it puts me in the fire, I'll rejoice 'cause you're there too. I won't be formed by feelings, I'll hold fast to what is true. And if the cross brings transformation, then I'll be crucified with you. 'Cause death is just a doorway into resurrection life. And if I join you in your suffering, then I'll join you when you rise. And when you return in glory with all the angels and the saints, my heart will still be singing, my song will be the same. Oh, Christ be magnified, let his praise arise. Christ be magnified in me. And oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. And oh, Christ be magnified, let his praise arise. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. And oh, Christ be magnified from the altar of my life. Oh, Christ be magnified in me. In the darkness you were away, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes. to fulfill the law and prophets. And came the word from the throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming, and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering, you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings.
All the heaven held its breath till the stone was moved for good. For the Lamb had conquered death, and the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe. For the souls of what we'd come to the Father had restored.
And the church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. In the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Oh, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one, God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings. Dankie Jesus dat ons U kan aanbid as die koning. Dat ons U hand kan sien oral in hierdie wêreld. En alles wat U gemaak het. Die hele skepping roep uit. Die hele skepping roep uit, Here, dat Jesus is koning. Here, ek vra Here dat U ons harte oopmaak vanaand, Here, dat ons U woord kan ontvang. U waarheid. Amen.
Right. Okay, the sound is working. Great. Thank you so much to the team for leading us in worship tonight. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for coming to join us this evening. Right. Let me just get my PowerPoint up here. Our subject this evening is going to be the very important and interesting subject of garden science, which is a part of a series which you guys have been doing at this church, trying to tackle some of the big questions confronting the church and the individuals as well. Whether you are a believer or perhaps even this evening, we might have some people here this evening who don't believe in Jesus Christ. That's okay. We welcome you to this evening, and we pray that you would give us an ear to hear as we dive into this very interesting subject. So I'm going to do a short lecture for you, and then we're going to break to a questions and answers session. And since it's on garden science, I've done the wise thing of making sure to not pretend to anybody out there that I'm a scientist. So I've brought some real scientists with me. I have some students here from Northwest University who are going to help me in the Q&A panel, so they'll join us for that session as well, if there's a scientist out there and you want to discuss physics and biology and that kind of stuff. But we'll get to that. All right, well, let's start then. We're going to fire up our PowerPoint at the back there. My name is Simon Brace, and I'm with a campus ministry called Ratio Christi. We exist at 5 universities here in South Africa. We have a website there. Do feel free to go to our website. We have a lot of recommended resources there for free, and other articles on all kinds of interesting topics. And so it's not just for students, it's for everybody. And so do feel free to visit our site. We also have a YouTube channel in which we're on a weekly basis interviewing scholars on all kinds of topics. We tend to focus on the contentious topics, so we don't know how long that's going to last on YouTube, but anyway, there it is. If you want to go and have a look at some of those, you're free to go and check those out, and please subscribe to us. And if you happen to find a big suitcase full of money that you don't want, you can donate it to our ministry as well, because we're a student ministry, so we're low on funds, you see. The students have to go after university to make the money. So if you discover a suitcase full of money you don't want, you can send it our way for Jesus, okay? All right, so I've added in our next slide here, the title of our talk, Garden Science, but I've added in faith there because, of course, as Christians, we think that faith and God have something to do with one another. And then we've got this issue called science. And one of the biggest challenges we find in our society today is that we have to deal with the fact that science is everywhere around us. The success of science is everywhere. Everything we use, from this device I'm trying to figure out now in front of me to earphones, we're surrounded by the success of science. And so how do we live in a world where there's an overwhelming success of science, and what must we do? Because many people are of the opinion that science is leading and progressing, and religious people should take a back seat to science and keep that to themselves, or perhaps abandon their faith altogether. Is there a conflict between science and God, or science and faith? And can God and science be reconciled? That's the tension we're going to deal with tonight. And so the purpose of this talk is to try and help the average layperson, like myself, deal with this issue. Since I'm not a formally trained scientist, okay, what you can also take comfort in as a Christian is most people on this planet aren't formally trained scientists. So don't be put out by that. But yet, it's important for us as Christians to love God with our mind. And one of the things that we can do is think about the culture we live in and how it is that we can come to some understanding of this thing of Christianity and science. Okay, so the purpose this evening is to explore this topic and this topic generates a tremendous amount of heat. Make no mistake about it, not only between people of faith and people who aren't people of faith, for example, atheists or skeptics, but also in-house between Christians sometimes there's intense discussion, and we'll be able to address that as well going on this evening. All right. The roadmap for this evening is to just go through and look at a couple of questions. What is faith? What is science? I'm going to give 2 responses to the skeptic. Why the history of science matters, responding to scientism, we'll unpack that. And then reconciling the knowledge of God and His revelation and dealing a little bit with the disagreement that exists between Christians. What is faith? Well, we know that faith is critical. Hebrews 11 talks about this, that it's impossible to please God without faith. But of course, the prerequisite is that there is a God to have faith in. So you must believe that God exists in order to have faith. And so it's important that we first of all come to understand why this question is important, and more importantly, what does faith mean? Well, as we've discovered in the past, we've looked at our definitions of faith, and we'll see here that from my previous talk I did on God and the existence of God, we were introduced to Richard Dawkins, and his definition for faith is belief in spite of, or even perhaps because of the lack of evidence. It's the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. And he's not the only one saying that. We have other famous atheists like Bertrand Russell who say the same thing, that where there is evidence, no one speaks of faith. We do not speak of faith that 2 and 2 are 4, or that the earth is round. We only speak of faith when we wish to substitute emotion for evidence. So here you see these skeptics saying this is what faith is, and sadly many Christians think that this was faith is, okay? And of course you're going to see how the problem then emerges, because in the next question we're going to deal with this, or what is science? The intellectual and the science is a definition from the Oxford Dictionary. Science is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Okay, so science is the attempt to examine the world around you, to conduct experiments, to gather evidence, to test things, and to prove things. Okay, and so this is a definition of what science is. Well, if science is dealing with, for example, observation and experiment, and faith is opposed to looking at evidence, then you can see there's an immediate tension between the two. You see, that's why these atheists think, well, if you're a person of faith, then stay out of the science department. Okay, because we're doing experiments and we're investigating things, and you people have got emotion, so keep your emotions to yourself. Here's the tension that's in the mind of the skeptic. So how do we respond? Well, there's 2 ways to respond to this. First of all, we need to point out that this definition of faith is false, and then we're going to give our responses to this position. Okay, so the solution then is to say that biblical faith is trusting in the ultimate authority of the God of the Bible. Okay, but trusting in an authority is not something that you have to do in an irrational way. You know, if I'm in my kitchen and suddenly there's a fire on the stove, and my friend Peter walks in, and he's a fireman, and I'm about to throw a bucket of water onto that chip fire, okay? Peter's going to say, Simon, don't do that, okay? Because he's a fireman. If I turn around and say to Peter, say, look, hey, what do you know? And I just throw a bucket of ice cold water onto a chip pan fire, what's going to happen? You're going to have an explosion. See? Now, I have reason to believe, good reasons to believe, that when it comes to fires, that Peter's an authority, because he's a fireman, and typically firemen are authorities on fires. So when the fireman speaks, you ought to listen. Well, that same kind of view of putting faith in Peter is what we do with God, except the issues that God deals with are much more significant than fires in your kitchen, because God is speaking to issues related to eternity and the meaning and purpose of life and what on earth you are here for. So in that sense, when we are trusting in God, we have faith in him, but we don't just do that without kind of abandoning our minds. As the Hebrew says, you have to believe that God exists in order to have faith in him. So God has given us good reason to believe that he exists. We look at the last lecture we did on Romans chapter 1, talks about something we can know something about the nature of God from the things that have been made. Psalm 19 talks about the heavens declare the glory of God. Day after day they pour forth knowledge and speech. And the creation communicates something to us about God. We know from Romans 2 that it's not just physical things through which God communicates us, but there's an immaterial dimension to this world as well. Inside all of you, there's this thing called a conscience. And your conscience is tied to this thing called morality. And morality isn't physical, nevertheless it's true. If you don't think it is, just let me walk over then, if you don't think that morality matters, then I can just come over here and, we can just do this kind of stuff, and carry on as if nothing went on, you see? Did you trip over a piece of morality? No. Did you bump into a piece of morality? No. Morality is true. That's called theft, by the way, okay? Okay. So there's an example of me proving to you that morality exists. It's an immaterial dimension to this world. It exists. Okay, we don't live in a world just governed by physics and chemistry. Acts 17, Christianity further says more than this, because we're not just a people of faith, we are a people of a historic faith. God's interrupted history in many occasions, but on the occasion that matters the most to us, it's through this person of Jesus Christ, this person who was crucified under Pontius Pilate and raised from the dead. Okay. And through that event, God has given us assurance to men that he loves us and that he's come to find us wherever we may be. And in there, we find the gospel. So, we must first of all make sure that the skeptic doesn't define faith for us. Okay? This is a biblical view of faith. God doesn't say leave your head at the door when you walk into the church. Even though some Christians might do that and leave their minds, that's not a biblical way. We need to love God not just with your heart, but with your mind, okay, with your entire being. God isn't irrational, and he doesn't demand irrationality within the church. Okay, so this is a more honest picture of what this looks like. Faith and science fit together, okay? And I'm going to now unpack for you how we're going to make our case and develop a kind of easy, accessible response to the skeptics of our age, okay? All right, so how might we do that? Well, let's move to the next slide. Now, suppose you meet a skeptic, okay, here in South Africa. We get this objection a lot at university. People will say something like this: Christianity is just a white man's religion. You people come here to Africa, you white people, you come to Africa and you give us the Bible and you take our land. Okay? We get that a lot at the universities. How do you respond to this notion that Christianity is a white man's religion? What would you say to that? Would you shut your mouth on campus here when you're at Stellenbosch or UCT or Wits? Well, we can have a response, because if we look at the Bible, we will see that the Bible has a lot to say about Africa. In fact, the word that the Old Testament uses for Africa is the word Cush. Okay, the land of Cush. In fact, there are 57 references to the land of Cush in the Old Testament. We know a lot about Africa in the Old Testament. Okay? After God judges the nation of Israel, okay, he then judges all the other nations that he used to judge Israel. The Egyptians get judged, they're African. The Libyans get judged, okay, they're African. And so does the land of Cush, amongst the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Phoenicians and the Edomites. So God is actually dealing with the Africans way back there in the Old Testament. There's massive trade going on between Africa and the Middle East, because Africa's got a lot of resources. Okay? So we find Africa mentioned on multiple occasions in the Old Testament. Furthermore, this kind of skepticism becomes a problem for the skeptic, because in the New Testament we find that one of the earliest converts to Christianity is an Ethiopian. Okay? Who was a person sent by Candace, the queen of Ethiopia, to Jerusalem. And there he is introduced to the gospel through Philip, And so one of the earliest converts to Christianity is a man from Africa. Not a white-faced European like the rest of you. In fact, you guys are late on the scene here. Okay? Furthermore, most of the early doctrines in the church that deal with the divinity of Christ and some of the early doctrines in early church history were formulated, discussed, debated, and confirmed in our church creeds by North African churchmen. Many of them. Origen. Another very famous African, Augustine from Carthage. This book here, written by Thomas Oden, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, is confirmation that we have deep roots in Africa with Christianity. So we show then that this objection is false. How? By some basic history. You don't need to be a Christian to refute this. An atheist can refute this objection because you can't just erase this history. The church has been in Ethiopia for 2,000 years. Christianity was in Africa before it arrived in Europe. Okay? So this is an objection which comes up often, and it's false along historical grounds. Why is this important? Because we can examine history with respect to science, and if we begin to do that, you will see that when people say that, God and science have nothing to do with each other, you will see along historical lines that is patently false. Okay. This is a statement here from Alfred North Whitehead, a very famous intellectual and philosopher who co-authored the Mathematica Principia, or was it the other way around? I think, is it Principia Mathematica? I forget which one. With a very famous chap who we've just seen, Bertrand Russell. These guys were not Christians. Look at what he says. I do not think, however, that I have yet even brought out the greatest contribution of medievalism to the formation of the scientific movement. What he means by medievalism here is the historic Christian faith. What he's saying in this statement here is it was out of the Christian worldview that modern science was birthed. Okay? Or maybe you don't believe that. Well, then let's just go through our list here. Now, I've only got a short list. There is a massive list of these people. I've just given a few names here. Let's just go through some of them. Here's a chap who's pretty well known in science, Robert Boyle. Okay, and you can try and follow us. He discovered the first gas law, Boyle's law. Okay, Isaac Newton. Gee whiz, he's a lightweight in science. This is a man, a passionate dissenting Protestant. Spent more time studying the Bible than maths and physics. Leonhard Euler, arguably one of the greatest mathematicians ever, published more mathematics than any other single mathematician in history, much of it brilliant. A Calvinist pastor. You're going to see where these guys' backgrounds. All Christians, people of faith. Michael Faraday. Some of these people founded the scientific disciplines. This is just showing you through history that this notion that God and science are at war with another is just false. You don't need to be a scientist to point this out. You just ask a skeptical question. What do you do with this laundry list of people? Michael Faraday. James Clerk Maxwell, one of the greatest minds in science, was a Protestant who learned the Bible at the age of 14, transformed our understanding of nature. His famous equations unified the forces of electricity and magnetism, indicating that light is an electromagnetic wave, whatever that means. His kinetic theory established the temperature is entirely dependent on the speed. That's science, folks, for those of you non-scientists. Okay. George Mendel. Here we have a Catholic Augustinian monk, founded the science of genetics. Arthur Compton, a Baptist. Even the Baptists are involved. There's a deacon, a Baptist deacon, who discovered light can behave as a particle as well as a wave and coined the word photon to describe a particle of light. And the women were involved too. How's this interesting woman? Mary Anning, a devoted Anglican, spent her time reading the Bible, discovered the first complete specimen of a plesiosaur and deduced the diets of dinosaurs with that cape on and that basket. Okay? All right. That sounds like science to me. What about this woman? She had a pretty big impact. We're thankful for her. If you go to the hospital, you're thankful that this woman came around. Florence Nightingale transformed nursing into a respected, highly trained profession. using statistics to analyze wider health outcomes, advocated sanitary reforms, largely credited with adding 20 years to the life expectancy between this period. All Christians. Charles Babbage, here's another Protestant devotee, the father of the computer analytical engine and turning the Turing complete computer in 1837, the first general purpose computer. Charles Babbage. I'd also look like that if I was inventing computers. Eventually, that look in his face is rather scary there. Yeah. How about this guy? You've heard of this guy in the age of quantum physics. Werner Heisenberg, a Lutheran, one of the primary creators of quantum mechanics, formulated the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Lord Kelvin, here's some significant contributions. On the Kelvin scale, absolute zero, he deduced the first two laws of thermodynamics and so forth and so on. And there we go on. Friedrich Gauss, another one. George Washington Carver, this is an interesting guy in America. His contribution was into the area of agriculture. Okay? Working with peanuts and what they do for nitrogen and all this stuff. A genius of a man. And bringing us to a contemporary science, Francis Collins, who was an atheist who became a Christian, okay, and at one stage was leading the Human Genome Project. And there is a much more massive list. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So obviously, if these people didn't see the supposed tension or incongruity between God and science, then there isn't one, because you can't just rub what these people did out, okay? So as a non-scientist person, you can maybe learn a few of these names, and when your skeptics come, you just say to them, well, what do you do with Faraday, Boyle, Newton? Newton's a good one to remember because a lot of people will know about him, okay? Maxwell and a few others. And then you let that skeptic chew on that for a while, okay? So that's our first response. It's an easy one, accessible to everybody, for those of us who aren't scientists. Now, how do we respond to this second thing, this problem of science is the only discipline in which we get truth and knowledge? This is a definition for this view that science is the only place that gives us truth and knowledge. Scientism is the promotion of science as the best or only objective means by which society should determine normative and epistemological values. This view is often driven at many of our modern day universities. You know, if you want to be a person of truth, you go and do science, and if you want to be an idiot, you go to the church. Okay, that's kind of the tension that we have going on here, because they think that science is the only place in which we can find truth. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to actually test that, okay, with it in a debate. So pay attention now to this debate. It's a short clip from a debate between a Christian man, Dr. William Lane Craig, he's got the beard, and another guy, Peter Atkins, who is a scientist who's alive today, and he writes a lot of the textbooks which are used by a lot of science students today, even here in South Africa. I think it's chemistry books, okay. This is a bona fide debate between a Christian. And the question is over scientism. Okay, listen to what Atkins says. He uses the word scientism, omnipotent. Okay, listen carefully and pay attention to the response. If we can run the clip.
That's taken together with a reason why people believe, desperate to believe, together with the fact that you don't need actually a God, in a sense amounts to an argument against the existence of God.
Well, I guess I don't see that. I mean, why doesn't that commit the genetic fallacy of trying to say that by explaining how a belief originates, you thereby show the belief to be false? Even if it were true that belief in the existence of God were the product of fear and anxiety and so forth, which I don't for a minute admit, but even if it were, that's simply a genetic fallacy to say that because that's the way the belief originates, that therefore the belief is false.
But that's only one half of the argument. I'm not saying that that alone is adequate, and I'm not saying that the fact that science can account for everything alone is also adequate. But taken together, the fact that science is omnipotent, and the fact that I can understand why people like you desperately want to believe in God, that is an argument against the existence of God.
But two fallacious arguments put together don't make a sound argument, right?
But do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Here it goes.
Yes, I do deny that science.
So what can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the
So
whole...
put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, all right, okay. Yeah.
So
Okay.
we are, none of these beliefs can be scientifically proven, and yet they are accepted by all of us, and we're
That's taken together.
All right. So there you have a great Christian apologist and defender of the faith tackling a very prominent atheist who's got the science is the only place for truth. And he says to them, I'm going to give you 5 things that science. And he goes through all of these things: aesthetics, ethical judgments, logic and mathematics, and fundamentally that science itself, in order to even do what it has to do, has to presuppose certain things in order to do its task in the first place, which it cannot demonstrate nor prove. It just has to assume those. Okay? And so this is where we can empower Christians to tackle this popular view called scientism. Okay? So those are my 2 responses then, and those are there for lay people, okay, because that's where I find on a popular level where a lot of the heat comes from in those kinds of things. You know, faith and science have nothing to do with each other, and science answers all the questions. No, it doesn't. Science doesn't answer all the questions. It can't answer moral questions. It can't even justify itself. It presupposes philosophical concepts. It presupposes maths and logic. That's not science. It has nothing to say to aesthetic judgments and any other metaphysical claims that we are all rationally justified in making. All right, so I want to go back now to our next slide now, because we're going to look now at how it is that this ties up with Christianity. So suppose we talked about this. If you see this device here, and you've never met the person who built it, you'll think, gee whiz, that's a nice chair. It's made out of wood, so it's the guy built that obviously had some carpentry skills. But then you find out that the same chap also made this other device, and you go, wow, he's more than just a carpenter, because he can make chairs and guitars. But if he makes guitars, he must have some musical ability. So I've never met this carpenter, but he must have some kind of carpentry skills and music skills, because look at what he's made. And then he writes me a whole bunch of letters, and I could come to know a tremendous amount about this carpenter from the things that he has made. And then we get to meet him. Okay. This is how a person sometimes reveals himself to you. Well, this is not too different from how God has revealed himself to us. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that when we're confronted with creation, it's just maybe different in the sense that it's over the top. Okay? God doesn't make a chair, he's built a cosmos. Okay? It's a little bit more impressive than a chair. It's the same kind of rational thinking, though, because Romans says that we can know something about God from the things that have been made. And just like the carpenter wrote you letters, you've got this thing called the Bible, which is really a library because it's a bunch of books. Okay, we've got 5 minutes at the back there to wrap this up then. Okay, and what I mean by this is I'm trying to kind of hit you with this imagery so that you can feel like you're justified, or there's some rationality to your faith, that you don't have to throw your mind out the window as a Christian, because the cosmos isn't chaotic. The cosmos isn't random, okay? The cosmos is highly designed. It carries purpose and intentionality. If you're not convinced, then consider these next things. You think that looks like those things are designed, that they have purpose? Absolutely. Does a cosmic accident produce that? No, it doesn't. because everything that designs that is built with an information system called DNA. And information systems don't arise out of a periodic table. That's the universe in which you find yourselves. Okay. And it gets bold, whether we're looking at the cosmos and in terms of the heavens. It's also beautiful. Didn't have to be, it just is. It's rational. It's logical. It's mathematical. Isn't that coincidental? As if it was created to be discovered by minds that can do logic and mathematics and physics. It was created in some sense to be discovered. This is a perplexing problem for many scientists. Why is the universe the way it is? For rational minds discovers, whether we look things on a large scale, whether it's from, the large to the small, down to that size of thing, inside those cells. We can look into the cell now, and what we find doesn't get simple, it gets increasingly more complex. If you're not convinced, just speak to the biologist, Jeff, because that's what he does. He looks down one of those things, and he's playing with viruses now. So it gets smaller than that. That's a hypodermic needle with individual blood cells on the end. You can actually count them. Okay? So it doesn't matter whether you're looking at the cosmos at this scale or down to the small. It's complex. It's designed. It bears witness to intelligence. In addition to that, we can discover that this universe has laws. It has gravitational laws, but it also has moral laws. Okay? It's not just a physical universe. And in an atheistic world, you cannot account for that. Why is this important? Because you live in this universe. And it's for these reasons that these Christian scientists thought that we could come to know God through His scriptures, but also through science. Okay? So it's important that we understand this, and it's important that we think about this as Christians, and it's important for me to also let you know that when God is revealing Himself to us, okay, He doesn't give us theology, He gives us revelation. You have to use your mind to interpret the Bible and understand the creation around you, and that gives you your concepts of God. Okay? That's how we do theology. All right, next slide. Out of this then, okay, the church was developing certain doctrines. The reason why this is important, okay, all right, is because within the church, sometimes you find that there are things over which Christians dispute, okay? Not just with those outside of the church, but within the church as well. And it's important for us as Christians, since we're going to deal with this topic, for you to be mindful of that, because I'm mindful of that there's some debates within the Christian church, and sometimes it collapses into us fighting with one another, and that's not productive, okay? One of the reasons why this is so difficult is because no one man can wrap his head fully around the Bible, and certainly no one can be a scientist who knows everything. So there's a lot to put together here. So it requires an approach of humility, okay? To master this and to master creation, no man can do that. And part of the difficulty with Christian theology is we're all trying to do our best to understand the scriptures and understand the science to the best of our ability. And nobody knows it all. And sometimes there is debate between Christians over how best to reconcile our science with the Bible, or how we understand the Bible with our science. And we have some scientists to help us with it. That's why sometimes we have important to remember what binds us are the essentials of the faith, which are usually codified in the creeds, like this, the early church creeds, which are very narrow and don't have much to do with science, but very important, because that's what makes Christianity what it is, the essentials. And so if we can go to our next slide, you'll see in the Christian tradition that there is a debate over theology. Okay? Within the scriptures, there's some debate between Christians. So this is Calvin Arminian. This is a discussion over election. Next slide. But there's also a debate between Christians with respect to science. Okay? So here we have three eminent scientists all alive today. Dr. John Lennox in the middle, Dr. John Sanford on the left, and Mr. Collins on the right-hand side. All eminent scholars, but they all have a different view of how we approach science in the scriptures. And I'm just saying this so that you can understand that. Okay. I'm going to close off with saying to you, before going to our Q&A session, that this book here is my most highly recommended book, God's Undertaker, for those of you who are new to God and science. Okay. And so if you're interested in reading more about God and science as somebody who's a non-scientist, this is a pearl of a book written by John Lennox. It's just so accessible, so fun to read, and it really feels like you're going to get somewhere with this. It's not too technical with a lot of jargon. All right, there's my lecture on God and science. as a non-scientist. We're going to pull our chairs up, get our two scientists up here with our chairs. And then PSA is going to run the mic for us. So if you've got a question, if you can just raise your hand, and then we will take questions, and then we'll try and field them. You guys can just put your chairs here. I'm going to move this. Come sit closer here in the middle here so that we can. Right. Okay, so let me just introduce them. This is Pierre and Job. You can tell them what you guys do.
So I am doing my master's in astrophysics, and I look at how stars form. So I take pictures using big DSTV dishes, do some maths, and get a really pretty cool picture of baby stars.
I'm Pierre. I'm doing molecular biology and virology, so I genetically modify viruses in order to produce other viruses.
Okay.
So you see, I've got some real scientists with me now. Okay. So now we can move to your question. They're Christians as well. They love the Lord as well. Okay. And so there we go. That's why my talk was very basic, because I'm not a scientist. Okay. So I was trying to help those of you like kind of like me. Hopefully it was helpful. Right. Any questions from our audience here? Since nobody likes to ask the first question, we can move to the second question then. Yes.
Simon, I have a question here
Yes.
that came in on the WhatsApp line.
Yes.
But you must listen closely now because I can't even pronounce everything. Okay. The person asks, I've learned that cells have receptors that hear the signal from sex hormones. However, these receptors doesn't always work. The SRY gene on the Y chromosome genetically determines malehood, but sometimes the SRY gene doesn't yet attach to the Y chromosome. Thus, you have an X chromosome with an SRY gene and a Y chromosome without an SRY gene. A Y chromosome with no SRY means that you are physically female, chromosomally male, and genetically female. When discussing gender in philosophy, I struggle to answer as why the Bible regards homosexuality or anything LGBTIQ as morally wrong.
Okay, you tackle the science, I'll tackle the philosophy. How about we do that? Okay.
It's just an exception.
Okay, well then, no, you can point it out.
Well, the situation with the Y chromosome would be an exception to the rule. So whatever we decide or can deduce from the situation that does not normally happen isn't the rule we apply to the rest of our moral situations.
The philosophical issues. Do you want to tackle that? Yeah, go for it.
So I think as Christians, we take our moral stance from the Bible. And the part you quoted on Romans 1, just following that, it says that men give up their natural relations to those contrary to nature. And you would want to ask, what does it mean by a nature? Now, nature doesn't mean what happens in nature, but according to the type of thing we are. So as humans, we see our sex organs have a certain plumbing, how it works. And then from that, the Bible seems to deduce that God has a certain design for how we should use them. And then from that, it follows how we should then act accordingly, being male and female together. Then further looking at more the psychological side, we also see, and the physiological, biochemical side, we see once a person starts becoming sexually active with another person, the hormones in your brain start attaching you to that person, and then babies tend to come from sex. So you end up having a family, and the best situation for a family, that's something we struggle with our society, is that children tend to be better, or just it's a better situation for a child if they're born in a home with a mother and a father. Now, of course, some natural evils do happen, or moral evils from the side of a father or mother, and they leave this child. But the best situation would still be one of a mother and a father. So in cases like that, you would rather prefer a situation of one mother, one father, loving each other, continuing to have sex and have that bond being formed. And then if you want a community to also care for that, to keep a marriage together, because marriage is quite difficult, or at least that's what my friends say who are married. So, and then you need like an entire community to help look after this pair, this couple, and then also to look after the child. So these are a bunch of natural reasons we see that Paul is pointing to when he says a man and a woman ought to be together. And then from that, also from the natural law side, you deduce what a marriage ought to be. And that should be a covenant before God and then before humans, because humans help to keep a marriage together if you have a community that supports both sides. And then in the case of the person born with the without the Y chromosome, whatever we decide in that case isn't applicable to how humans normally and naturally do occur. And if I mean by natural evil, I don't mean someone did anything wrong. It's just biology is unpredictable, and sometimes stuff happens that we can't help. That's how genetic diseases also are natural evils. And it doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. But then also you have cases of moral evils from human sides. And then as a society, we ought to act against these and try and create a society that's best for children to be brought up in.
Oh, I've got a microphone. Okay. Well, I think it's important that I make a comment on this objection now, because we're right on top of this issue of the current world of LGBTQ, social justice, progressive ethics, however you want to frame this term, transgender. And at the moment, to the best of my knowledge, the medical research on whether sexuality is all hardware or just software is by the major Royal Pediatrician, not pediatrician, but the Royal Society of Medicine has said this is not conclusive that this is. We do have anomalies, like Pierce pointed out, people with intersex, like Costa Semenya situation. By the way, we have a 1-hour interview on our YouTube channel with a medical professor specifically on this topic, and who's arguably, in my estimation, one of the most knowledgeable guys in the country on that topic. So do avail yourself of that if you want to listen to somebody who really knows that well. It's called Gender, and so you can go into our YouTube channel and find this. But what I want to comment on here is the philosophical issues, because this is what's not in part of the conversation. The student did say that they're a philosopher. Here's what's confusing. Go back a few years ago, and the homosexual community was saying that, well, we're just born this way. Of course, if you're just born this way, I would still have a question, well, suppose you're born and we could demonstrate that, for example, anger is in my genes. I like to smash people. Does that entitle me to do that? No. So we would have to ask further questions, and it's not sufficient to say that just because I've got this in my genes, therefore I don't think that follows. So I would want to ask a few more questions. The other issue is, to the best of my knowledge, the debate has shifted. You're not just born that way, because the debate coming from the transgender community is that sex is a social construct. In the new CSE program in South Africa, Comprehensive Sexual Education, they're telling us, thanks to Judith Butler and her ideas, that sex is a social construct. So, well, if you're born this way, then sex is not a social construct, but if it's a social construct, then they're wrong. So which is it? There's this massive contradiction that looms within this new movement now as to what sexuality is. Okay, and my concern is with this modern view that somehow sex is just a social construct, and so basically, what is sex? Whatever I decided it is, which is why you've got this proliferating amount of personal pronouns, because what are you? Whatever you choose to self-identify with. If Bruce Jenner was an Olympian male and he decides he's going to be a woman, then he's a woman. Why? Because he says so. Okay? Because for them there is no truth out there. Truth is whatever you think it is. Okay? This has got nothing to do with biology. This is philosophy. And this philosophy has its foundations in the skepticism of German and French philosophy, built predominantly on German idealism and the skepticism coming out of Europe. Stacked on top of that, you have the French existentialists. Where we are today with this issue is we have people who suffer, I think, from genuine instances of gender dysphoria, okay, all right, and struggling with these things, whether it's a person with intersex or somebody who's having a genuine medical condition that needs help. And now we've got a new wave of people who just think and are convinced of this bankrupt philosophy, of this postmodernism, critical theory, which is stacked upon the top of German idealism with a bunch of Marxism thrown in there, Herbert Marcuse, Jean-Paul Sartre, Michel Foucault, and they build their philosophy on top of this postmodernism. That's what a lot of people are being sold. It's got nothing to do with genetics. It's got to do with a philosophy. And if I think that that philosophy is wrong, which I do think it is because it's self-defeating, then I'm not obligated to entertain that ethics, which is now being rammed down the throats of everybody in society through diversity and equity training. Okay? So the reason why we are where we are in the Western world with this is not a crisis, I think, of genuine instances of people with gender dysphoria. It's because people have bought into this bankrupt philosophy. Okay? And that's what's coming out of the halls of all your social justice scholars, people like Judith Butler, Peggy McIntosh, and that crowd.
Nog vrae? Hande?
Something I want to encourage you with this this conversation is I recently got married, and I just realized that the Christian worldview has a lot to offer. God knows how we're made, and He knows what's best for us. So I want to encourage you in your relationships, seek the scriptures, seek wisdom, and ask advice from people who have gone before you. The modern day kind of says you should figure it out for yourself, but I won't figure out how to build a bridge myself. I will go to those who have built bridges before me. So look at people who have built healthy families and get advice from them. They probably know what they're talking about more than I do as a young person.
Okay, ons het nog 'n vraag hier op die WhatsApp lyn gekry oor die skepping. Wat sê ons vir iemand wat vra oor die skepping in 6 dae? En dan die tweede deel van die vraag is die ouderdom van die wêreld volgens die Bybelse account daarvan of dan wat die wetenskap daarvan sê.
Okay, let me say one thing first and then I can hand over to you, Job. Okay, this is kind of what I was tagging on at the end of my talk and saying that there is a debate between Christians. You get some Christians who are young earth creationists and believe that the Bible was created in 6 days. You've got people who are old earth creationists, okay? And you also have people who are theistic evolutionists, okay? That's why I had the 3 slides up there. Mr. Collins is a theistic evolutionist, John Lennox is an old earth creationist, and John Sanford is a young earth creationist. This is that internal debate between Christians now, okay? And in this room, I suspect we've got some people who have differences of opinions on it, and some people who haven't made their minds, and some people who are not even sure that there was a debate in the first place, okay? So what I understand is there's actually more than just 3 views. There's lots of selected views and modified views and everything, in part because there's so much we have to kind of bring together there. That's a good, robust understanding of the scriptures with what we understand in the science, okay? And there's intense debate between how we reconcile those 2 things in that, okay? So that's from a lay person's perspective. What I take exception to is when that debate caves in and Christians start attacking each other, okay? So unfortunately that has happened in the church, and that's unfortunate. The debate is important, we need to have it, okay? And you need to listen and be persuaded in your own mind, okay? But now we're going to listen to the scientist, see what he has to say about this thing. Yes.
So the beginning of the universe is one of the strongest arguments for God's existence. The fact that the universe hasn't always existed is a big thing, because then there must have been something or someone that caused the universe to come into existence. So firstly, we should understand that the church didn't always believe, everyone in the church didn't always believe the earth is 6,000 years old. The first time it was like calculated was by a guy called James Ussher in the 1600s. The Christianity is 2,000 years old. If it's only been calculated 400 years ago, it means it's not a central Christian thing. As Saint Augustine, in one of his books in the 400s, said that Genesis is unclear on the age of the universe. The scriptures can be interpreted in many ways, but the fact of the matter is God created. And so in that sense, Simon spoke about the 2 books, the book of nature and the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation makes it very clear that God created. He created through His Son, and He was intimately involved in creation. If we look up to the sky, we don't see, now according to the modern consensus on the science, and I have looked at the arguments and the Einstein stuff, and there's a pretty good reason, I believe personally, that the universe is not 6,000 years old. If you use the astronomy, you take the photos they used, you do the mathematics, you do the experiments, they can actually get a very precise age. And those guys they are really doing a lot of good research. And so if you want to differ on the scientific consensus of the age of the universe, you actually have to have a reason why they're wrong. And that would do them a favor. If you can prove with good arguments why the old Earth universe is not the truth, you're doing the whole world a favor. And but the fact of the matter is the scripture is unclear on the age of the universe. The 6 days, that word yom, day, can mean a time. It can mean an indeterminate time. So it's not something you have to be like make or break your faith on it. I personally love the Big Bang Theory. I think it's really a crazy development in the scientific history. It shows God's handiwork in how He created the universe. Yes. Any questions on that?
So he would be. So Job, let's identify him now. He's an old Earth creationist, but he's probably not a theistic evolutionist. Or you? Oh, so we don't know now. You see. So he's one of those guys who's got, as a scientist, a little bit of a position on that now. Well, that's interesting. We've discovered that about him. What is Pierre? Maybe give us Avi. What do you think?
About?
The age of the Earth. Come on, you got the microphone now. You tell us.
I think I'd mostly agree with Job, although I'll just add two philosophical issues that's usually either overlooked or raised during the discussion about the age of the earth. The first one would be in the same section of Genesis, you have God walking in the garden, and yet we do not hold that God has a physical body except in the incarnation with Jesus, when He takes up the human nature with His divine nature. So, I mean, hermeneutically, it's a bit more difficult than just saying, oh, it uses yom. And then further, another issue that is raised quite often, but it's a very big issue, is when people say you should just reject uniformitarianism. Now, that's a nice word to just throw around, you know. So uniformitarianism means the causes we see working today are the same that worked 1,000, 10,000, a million, a billion years ago. People want to reject that and say, so we just reject that assumption and then we don't need, you know, millions of years. There's a fundamental issue in that. We do not see men rise out of themselves, out of the dead. And yet that happened 2,000 years ago. So if uniformitarianism doesn't hold, then Jesus could just have raised out of the dead with absolutely no reason. It's just a fluke of nature. He prophesied, by accident he rose, because we just deny uniformitarianism, and there goes the entire basis for the Christian religion. So uniformitarianism is a quite fundamental assumption for us as Christians. You can't just throw that out and think we still have Christianity. Maybe I can add on the previous question.
Well, let's wait and see, because Pierce has got some other questions. I don't need that. I forget I got this thing strapped to the side of my face. Yes. Okay, so if you don't know what uniformitarianism is, you can stick around to the informal Q&A afterwards and come and ask us about that. Yes, Pierce.
Okay, hierso, die vraag wat ek hierso het verder, Simon, is het julle reeds baie van dit gedek. So ek gaan nou nie, wil nie ons moet herhaal nie. So ek dink ons moet geleentheid gee vir 'n paar closing arguments van julle kant af.
Okay.
Nog iets wat julle dalk wil sê, ons het so 5 minute en dan wrap ons op.
Okay, so you want us to give us a summary then of our...
Yes, please.
Okay, well, let these two guys do this and then I'll conclude us then. If you guys can just give some summary thoughts on the issue of God and science from your own perspective, your own experience. Yeah.
I think science has quite a lot to offer in premises, like reasons, for a philosophical argument, like what you're trying to prove. So science can serve as quite a lot of premises, a lot of reasons that end in conclusions that God exists. Examples through the ages have been stuff like mentioned earlier, the Kalam cosmological argument, arguments from design, all the way from complexity in nature to fine-tuning of the universe. So science can actually be quite a treasure trove for Christians. And then I would just quickly want to add on what I said in the first question. What's important is the arguments leveled against or in favor of a natural law perspective, seeing how God made things and then deducing a morality from that, are just as easily leveled against homosexuality as it's leveled against people who have sex before marriage, cohabitation, and all of those cases. So the way you're treating your friends who are sleeping together, the guy and the girl, is the same way you ought to be treating the transgender person and the homosexual. And if you can love the one, in fact, you ought to love all of them. and to just invite them to church, not exclude people, but not to compromise on what we as Christians believe.
I want to encourage you all. Some of these words, have absolutely overwhelmed me through the years. I want to encourage you to seek wisdom. There's this passage in Proverbs. It says, wisdom is standing at the gates, and she's calling, and she's saying, "O ye simple, seek wisdom and live." And I want to encourage you, read. Christians should read. We should read a lot. We should read our scriptures, but we should also read what other Christians have written. And I want to encourage you to be curious. Ask questions. It's good for you. When I was a younger believer, I used to ask a lot of questions, and it made some of the pastors uncomfortable. But honestly, their uncomfortability was their problem. It was good that I asked, because there are answers. If there was no answers for the Christian faith, it would not be good to believe it, honestly. Paul says if Christ was not risen from the dead, all our faith is vanity, is worth nothing. If Christ did not live, die, and raise, Christianity is a fluke. But if he did, it's the craziest news in the world, this possibility that we might live forever with God. So seek wisdom, have these conversations. It's really a lot better than conversations about TV series and music, most music. Seek wisdom. And the scriptures are great reading. And like Simon said with the God's Undertaker, that's a pretty good read. Start somewhere. Make it a discipline. Train your mind as you would train your body. As you would eat healthy food, let the media you take in be healthy. Because so often we spend too much time on garbage and our brain rots. It's unfortunately what happens. And you see the effect of someone eating healthy over a course of 15 years. You see the same with someone with the media and the books they consume. You become wise. You become better husbands, better wives, better teachers, better engineers, better Christians. Yes.
Yes, better musicians as well. Yes.
Simon, sorry, jy het nog een ingekom wat
Okay.
wat vra oor ook oor die Genesis. As jy dalk net laastens dit kan net vinnig raak daaraan het. Iemand sê die Bybel het gesê dit het aand geword en dit het môre geword. En as dit nie nou daar verwys nie, dan waarna verwys dit dan? As daar nou in die Bybel staan oor die eerste dag, tweede dag, derde dag.
So that's getting us back to the question of the age of the earth. This question is probably coming from a young earth creationist. There are, believe me, there are scholars with PhDs in Hebrew. They've all got a response to how it is we understand how the words are being used there, where else the word in Hebrew is used elsewhere to not refer to just a day and a night and a day. So, like I said, this is where the debate is, okay? The difficulty is even if you do grant the young earth position in Genesis, okay, all right, then what you have to do then is you have to then reconcile that with also dealing with the science as well. So there's a tension there. So it's about balancing these two, okay? I've got many friends who are young earth creationists and agree with the questioner's position on how to interpret Genesis. And they're also scientists. John Sanford, for example, has a PhD from Cornell University, and he is one of the most well-known young earth creationist scientists in the world, in my estimation, okay? He invented the gene gun, okay? Which means, you know how you genetically modify stuff? He invented that machine. So he's not some lightweight scientist, okay? So there are good scientists in this, but the young earth creationists have to respond to certain things that old earth creationists are saying will begs explaining, whether it's to do with continental drift, geology, physics, speed of light. There's a big conversation to be had there. Into that, you also have a bunch of theistic evolutionists who are also some heavyweight scientists, and they've got their views. So that's where the debate is. So I encourage you, as Job said, is ask yourself the questions. Go and look at the various ways that they interpret Genesis and how they reconcile that with the science. Go and see, because each position has got some questions that have to be answered. I haven't found some of the old earth creationist interpretation of Genesis particularly satisfying. I tend to hold to a view of creation in terms of I believe that the case for intelligent design is compelling, and so I tend to have a problem with theistic evolution, not just because I don't agree with their take of Genesis, but also I think that there's some really good problems that are being leveled against evolutionary theory as it stands at the moment without some major qualifications, okay? But I've heard from some young earth creationists on some issues, and I thought, well, that's an interesting argument, like John Sanford. his work on genetics has got me thinking. So I'm kind of like, well, I will just sit back and listen to the debate. Thankfully, you don't have to resolve this, because nowhere in the church creeds, does it say, oh, before you met Jesus, figure out what the age of the earth is and get it. Thankfully, the church creeds are important. So we have to make sure that this question doesn't become an essential. It's never been an essential of the faith. Okay? The essentials of the Christian faith are captured in the creeds, and they're very short and very concise, and for good reason, because God says in 1 Corinthians that Christianity isn't a system of trying to be a smarty pants. Okay? Christianity is not just for intellectuals or philosophers. Okay? It confounds the Greeks because God sent a man crucified and raised him from the dead. Okay? And that's important to us as well. Doesn't mean it's not profound, because the gospel can satisfy the soul of a man who has no education, and at the same time it can entertain the thoughts of Sir Isaac Newton. That's the beauty of the gospel. But it's simple in this respect. Jesus came to this earth, was crucified under Pontius Pilate, was raised from the dead physically, and died on the cross for the sins of all men. And that if you believe in that, you shall be saved. That's the gospel. Is there anything to do with science in there? No. Does it mean we have to think as scientists as Christians? Absolutely. Okay. But don't be bullied into thinking if you can't resolve the God and science debate, you might not get into heaven. Okay. All right. That's my closing remarks on that statement. My final advice and prayer for you is, look, I want to encourage, as Job said, all of us as Christians to start thinking, to loving God, not just with our hearts, but with our minds. One of the most neglected verses in the book in the New Testament is Romans 12:2, which talks about, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Preachers love to preach that, hey? We all want a transformed mind. Well, why do you want a transformed mind? What does the rest of that verse say? It says that when your mind is transformed, you can come to discover the will of God. If you want to know what God's will in your life is, you're going to have this kind of encounter with God, not just in your heart, but in your mind. Okay? So it's important for us not just to have big hearts for Jesus, we should have big minds for Jesus as well. We should know the truth. Okay? And knowing the truth is something your mind does. So the formation of your mind is very important to Christ. And I would encourage all of you to enrich your walk with Christ by filling your mind with great ideas, reading good Christian literature, having these conversations. And who knows, if you're really bored, maybe you can invite some scientists to a braai one day and say, hey, Pierre and Job, come and tell us about the cosmos and about bacteria, viruses, okay? And they all can talk about it till the cows come home, you see. Might even be able to put you to sleep, okay? But no, we love our scientists. We need them. We want them. We want them to be the greatest scientists. We've produced some of the greatest scientists. We need to continue with that. Let me close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much, Lord, that we can come here this evening, gather together here, brothers and sisters in Christ, and discuss how awesome you are. Look at what you've done. Look at how you've revealed yourself to us through your amazing creation. The richness, the diversity, the scale, Lord. It's just overwhelming. The sky, the creatures, the animal, the systems, it's just overwhelming, and it's beautiful. It's mathematical. It's logical, Lord, as if it was being created to be discovered, Lord. Thank you that you've put us in this amazing creation, that we can walk outside and see your handiwork everywhere. Lord, we also thank you, Lord, that you came down and through your Son and through your life have revealed yourself to us as to who you are. That Jesus really becomes, that the UFOs would land that UFO. Okay, we're going to wrap that up. Okay, Father, we're going to get back to this prayer, Lord. But thank you, Lord, for everything. Thank you so much for our worship team here, Lord. We thank you for also having a great sense of humor as well. Fill our hearts with love, fill our minds with truth, and we just thank you so much for giving us in the hope of Jesus, the hope of the resurrection. Thank you so much for that. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.